I love this cheeky quote. So many, as you know, many creatures and plants communicate, but humans tell stories, and it might be Homo sapiens' defining characteristic. We use stories to pass on knowledge and culture and form social bonds and define gods and concepts like money. And all of you here are storytellers, very important storytellers, I would add. What makes a story a story? So this up for interpretation, but one definition might be a narrative, true or fictitious, prose or verse, that's designed to interest, amuse, or instruct the hearer or reader. And what I love about this definition is the focus is on the hearer or the reader and not the writer or whoever's telling the story. And for you as scientists and scientists communicators, the stakes with audiences are very high. People are looking to science and tech today to find answers. And today I want to empower you with the tools to make science information engaging and relevant in several forms, whether that's a live presentation, online videos, papers, podcasts, wherever you might be dabbling in. So this goes beyond just presenting facts. It goes into human connection, because that's what my job depends on, human connection and story. I am a writer and a director and a performer. I've been working in theater in New York City for over 10 years until COVID, as some of you may have just overheard Christy and I talking about. I'm also a master naturalist, and I'm in the process of developing a podcast that delves into citizen scientist questions. So I've created stories in many mediums with various levels of science communication threaded throughout, and I know firsthand the cost of poor storytelling. I can write the most terrific piece of art I want, but if I can't engage, whether that's speaking loudly enough or holding court in a room, it's really all for nothing. And maybe you've felt that too. Maybe you've lost a grant or had an inattentive classroom, or you didn't know what to do with your hands when you were talking. I'm still working on that myself. You probably had all the information that you needed, but there might be some disorganization or fear around delivering it. There is a presentation expert named David Odie, and he has a model called the Art of Connection, ART. And each one of these stands for how we want audiences to respond. That's A, accept your information, R, remember your information, and T, take action. And so today we're going to look into how we get to this art, ART of connection. I'm going to invite you to think a little differently about your role in giving presentations, give you some story frameworks that you could use straight away. We'll cover how you say, what you say, how you say it, and a little bit what you're doing while you're saying it. I would love some input from you on what you think makes a strong, effective communicator. Anything come to mind? You can drop it in the chat or shout it out. Humor. Absolutely, passion for the topic. Good listener. Thank you for saying that. Volume, listening. I love that you're already bringing up listening as part of communication, because I think but you're already ahead of the game. Conciseness, good introduction as to what's coming, humor, knowing your subject, relatable, emotional connection, confidence, identifying with the audience, universal experience. A plus, everyone gets it. Read the audience and adapt. Absolutely, not just being stuck to your script. Okay, you've already named some very salient qualities, and I'll touch on a little bit of these, but I'd like to go into the rules of storytelling, some rules to help structure how we get to these qualities we've discussed that are so compelling. I'm going to break these down into four rules, and break those rules down into tools that you can use to give clearer, more engaging presentations that spur your audience to action through embracing your storytelling capabilities, because you are all storytellers. Now, and I will talk about how to do it on Zoom versus in person. Absolutely. Oh, it's so tricky. Remind me about that in the Q&A. We can speak a little more about that. So I'm sure all of you have at some point have had to sit through a presentation that didn't apply to you, that maybe had lots of data and lots of facts, but nothing actually resonated with your life or circumstances, and it's quite boring. Because your information goes nowhere if it doesn't meet the needs of your audience. So how do you find out what the needs of your audience are? You have to understand why they're there. Most audiences are egocentric, for lack of a better word. They want to hear about things that directly affect them or their community. And that's going to help you get clear on what you're there to do for them and how you're going to deliver that message. What I'd love to hear from you again. What do you currently do to get to know your audience before you give a presentation, if anything? It's really fun if not. Presentation, a Zoom class, or prep a lecture. Icebreakers. That communicates a lot of warmth. I think that's so valuable. Getting to know you. Ask questions, of course. Correct titling, pre-class survey, yeah. Surveys I find are so helpful. It just sort of helps establish a kind of basic shared vocabulary. Yeah, I often find that you can ask people in advance, why are you inviting me to speak? Why am I speaking today? What are you hoping to get out of this? What are your expectations? What do you already know about this subject? Who organized this opportunity event? As you mentioned, some of these icebreakers are especially valuable, actually, because knowing some individuals in the room by name can give you more legitimacy and rapport and warmth. We're going to go into that a little more later. I'd like to do a little tiny bit of creative point of view writing with you all. So think of an audience that you recently presented to, delivered to, spoke to, however you communicate. And I'm going to ask you write 4 to 5 sentences, sort of a day in the life of one of those audience members. And in this day, an audience member should encounter at least one problem that your field relates to. I'll give you a couple minutes to do this. So again, a few sentences, imagining one specific audience member of yours, and in their everyday life, they encounter something that relates to your field and the kind of work that you're doing. I'll give you a couple minutes for this. Okay, great. Yeah, as you're ready, you can start dropping these in the chat. How would they see after? Oh, it's a golf superintendent. She will spend most of her time in the short grass looking for issues, setting cups, but occasionally she will be on the woodland edge, which brings her into tick territory, music included. Love this. Dun, dun, dun. That's perfect. A hard day's work in the outdoor environment. How what they see outdoors in their place compares with what they will be seeing outdoors on the hike. These are wonderful. Work like this, just a tiny bit of imagination work, can really help build out containers for our presentations and get into our audience's feet. I'm out in the woods a lot, love to hike, love trees, and I'm horrified by the number of diseases killing native species. These are really strong. They're very specific. These also help us create words and pictures that matter to our audience members. So words being the phrases that you're using to get your message across, and pictures the images and experiences you're creating in their mind's eye. So let's get even more specific in our audience-centric homework. So a specific purpose states the topic of your presentation, talk, lecture, delivery, and includes a number of main points in your speech. All specific purposes start with a verb that directly acts on the audience, like to inform, to persuade. I love a good juicy verb. It can really activate your whole, your delivery. So for my talk today, for this very talk, a vague purpose might be to talk about storytelling, but a specific purpose might be to equip my audience of scientists and science communicators with 4 guiding principles of storytelling. So your specific purpose might start with to inform or to persuade, and maybe your storytelling exercise that we just did, the daydreaming, might help a bit. So let's think of your audience, maybe the same one you were just using, and think of a specific purpose that you're there for. And you can share these in the chat. Again, they should begin with a verb that acts on the audience and ends with a number of segments. So I'm just looking back on Joellen's. I'm wondering if Joellen does work with tics, and I'm wondering if maybe it communicating with the golf.
I do.
Yes. Well, so does something come to mind for a specific purpose here about how you're acting on that audience?
I actually get to this halfway through my usual presentations that I want to create a sense of healthy paranoia. I want them to be concerned, but I want it to be healthy so they can recognize that there's steps that they can take to protect themselves from what they have to be concerned about.
Yeah, I hear. So you're at once. I mean, I think equip might be a good, to equip your audience of these professionals with the safety protocol they need, with 4 safety protocol they might need. Something like that.
That would work.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm seeing some others in the chat now. To guide my guests to realize that there are so many unanswered questions in the outdoors. Yeah, that's almost like inviting. I think that's inviting an audience to dream bigger. I love that. Enriching everyday raptor experiences to engage my students and empower them to make a difference by planting native plants. Yes. So as you continue to develop these specific purposes, I find it helpful to include, again, this number at the end. You don't need to have it now. Like if you don't have this presentation already done, absolutely fine. But including a number in there or some kind of segments is very helpful, just so you have, again, hyper specific purpose for being there. Like, I'm going to give you 5. But oh, look, 10. There we go. Christy just did it. With 10 steps they can take to enhance pollinator habitat. That's brilliant. Exactly. And so once we have this specific purpose, we can build out some of our main points of our talk, writing, the lecture, etc. They're going to help us build some structure around our story. So again, you are a storyteller, and when you share information, you are making your audience the hero of your presentation. You're asking them to go through some kind of transformation. You're telling a story, and a story has content and form. Content, as we just discussed, are the words and pictures that you use that matter to your audience and bring your presentation alive in their mind. And structure is what holds it all together. There's a great book called Houston, We Have a Narrative by Randy Olson, and he presents metrics for analyzing narrative structure. I think it's really helpful to use his non-narrative structures that he brings up actually as points of comparison. So the first one is when speakers use the word "and" too frequently, or writers use the word "and" too frequently. It becomes a boring non-narrative list with just too many facts. It doesn't create a meaningful picture in the audience's mind. So for example, this study shows this and that and the other thing and this other thing and this other thing. It's just facts. There's no craft there. Oh, yes, I can put that in the chat. Houston, we have a narrative by Randy Olson. And another trap we fall into, again, Randy Olson, is being overly narrative, using words like despite, however, yet too frequently. So it might sound like, our study shows this despite this factor. However, this other thing means that still somehow this is present. And yet, so again, it's a bit serpentine, not a meaningful picture. So a simple structure, story structure can help. I'd love to hear from you about, is there a structure you currently use for your presentations? You can drop it in the chat. Panic. Yeah, that's so gets that gets me talking at least. Tell them what I'm going to tell them. Tell them. Tell them what I've told them. Beginning, middle, and end. Very effective. Very good, Dave. Yeah, so you've probably heard of other story structures too, beginning, middle, and end, the hero's journey. These are all useful. I find that when without trying, I tend to bookend my presentations with the same theme topic, so we end up where we started. Great segue, Lynn. So I'm going to offer you some other structures that you might not know that are really exciting and have a lot of different applications. This is called a sparkline. In her book, thank you, Alice. In her book, Resonate, Nancy Duarte uses a sparkline structure to analyze and build presentations. And this structure is so powerful because it utilizes tension and release. So remember, however, we talked about humor a little bit. There was a few suggestions of how that's important in a communicator. A lot of what comedians, going to the extreme, do is tension and release, really. And that's why this sparkline is so useful, because she suggests switching the audience back and forth between a state of what is and what could be. So it's alternating between challenge and solution, pain and pleasure. So again, I'd love to hear from you. So maybe we could take a few minutes now just to reflect on what is in your field and what could be. I'd love to share that in the chat. I discuss tick life cycle and behavior, building tension, and then provide solutions. That's a perfect example. What is loss of native plants, loss of insect populations? What do we find in this nature preserve, and what might be the land trust management goals for the preserve? Yeah, making science is interesting for everyone. Absolutely. So I wonder if the what is science isn't interesting to everyone, but what could be is a world in which it's, everyone has a say and a stake. And this is again where we get to use our imagination. What could be? Oh, so Sterling, what is loss of native plants, loss of insect populations? What could be healthy, intact ecosystems, lots of wildlife? Absolutely. For my photography students, it's showing the typical, more mundane image of a natural subject and then showing a more powerful storytelling image that illustrates their natural habitat or behaviors. Lovely. A freelance journalist, write articles about a lot of environmental issues. I came in with no knowledge, so I went for all of this training. Alice, is that meaning we could all start from we start from nothing and then we can actually gain a lot of knowledge in a short period of time? Or maybe there's a second piece to your story that you're writing in the chat right now. Christy, great. You have 3 acres of homogeneous lawn that you spend hours mowing weekly all summer. What if instead you could have fields of summer blooms covered with buzzing bees and beautiful butterflies and far more free time to watch them? That evokes a lot of words and a lot of pictures. That's a really salient example. Pictures of dead hemlocks where no action was taken, then healthy hemlocks. It's really compelling that some of you already have photographic evidence of sort of to actually show the difference. It's not just an imaginative exercise. It's I can actually show you. So that's a Sparkline. Again, tension and release, challenge and solution, alternating between pain and pleasure. This structure is from writer Dan Rome, who argues that clear storylines are our best defense against confusion, which I love. And for Rome, the storyline that you select depends on what you want to do. Are you changing the audience's information, abilities, actions, or beliefs? So he has 4 structures: a report, an explanation, a pitch, or a drama. I chose the explanation today, which is often used for an academic paper or a lecture. So pretty broad spectrum here I wanted to share with you. The explanation teaches new insights or abilities, and it gradually scaffolds through a journey where we start with the lay of the land, again, using some of the vocabulary that we were just talking about what is our roadmap. This is the route we're taking to our destination. What is the first step? What are our next steps? We're almost there. We're going to reflect back on how far we've come, and we have now made it. We have some new knowledge or ability. Is it repeatable? So another little writing exercise. I'd love if you wrote just a sentence for the lay of the land. This might be the same as your what is sentence, and then a roadmap step. So for instance, let's see, like Alice's, I'm reflecting on what is. Oh, Alice's what is actually a past state of the lay of the land where I knew nothing. And then the roadmap is the first step, meaning I'm trying to find your text, Alice. Yes. So I came in with no knowledge, went in for this training. So the first step might be the first bit of training that you went. You're going to adapt this to be a personal narrative, for instance. There we go. Yeah, Alice is already chiming in. I wrote my first article about the emerald ash in 2008. So again, I'd love to hear from you. Just a statement of these first 2 stages. So maybe a sentence for what the lay of the land is, and then what the roadmap. What are we going to do to get to our destination? So if our state of what is lots of dead hemlocks, as Steve has said, where action was not taken, the roadmap is showing us here's what we're going to do to get healthy, thriving hemlocks.
I'm having difficulty envisioning how this would work within a presentation. I see this more as a longer workshop or even a course.
That makes sense. It's like Dan Rome cites this as like an academic paper, but it is something in which we are teaching new knowledge or an ability. So you're right. You could actually build a semester-long course using this type of structure. So I think with you, that's what's so nice about these frameworks is you can bend them and contract them and sort of see if you can break them or not, basically. I'm inclined to insert an image of the destination before showing the roadmap. Yes, I mean, what is sort of fascinating is I think you could actually use the Nancy's little Sparkline at first, what is and what could be, before showing the roadmap. You might want to combine those two. A field of a non-native field of non-native honeysuckle blooms into a diverse wildflower meadow. Yep. Again, that's a little sparkliney. So what is, what could be, and then you might explain how, here's what we're going to do to get from the non-native honeysuckle blooms into the diverse wildflower meadow. Beginning minutes of monarch butterfly gardens are devoted to building and reinforcing enjoyment of monarchs. Next is a statement of their current struggle, followed by what we can do to make a positive impact. Yep. So your roadmap would say, we're kind of we're kind of assembling all the tools we've just talked about, sort of, and what we're going to do to make a positive impact. I'm going to share 4 ways that we can make a positive impact today. Hemlock woolly allegid, I'm sorry if I didn't say that correctly, is spreading northeastern at an alarming rate. The first step for citizen scientists is to help scientists know where it presently is. So learning how to identify the disease and carrying out surveys provides essential information. Exactly.
Adelgid.
Adelgid, thank you. Hemlock woolly adelgid. Oh, that sounds like a Victorian a daughter's name or something like that. Adelgid. Hemlock woolly adelgid. Large tree planting project replacing the dead ash trees with a great diversity of native tree. Yes, you all have cracked it, absolutely. So again, explanation teaches new insights or abilities, going through each step from the lay of the land to the arrival point. This last one is from Fast Forward, which is a consulting group that helps build brands, and they use stories. They use this model in their presentations, which is hook, meet, payoff. The hook is a bold statement to engage the audience straight away. This could be a rhetorical question, a personal anecdote, or a big idea. It is not an agenda slide. I was very guilty of this. I would always start my presentations by going, here's what we're going to talk about today. That is anti-hook, Fast Forward would say. It tells people what's coming, and it's a recipe for them to just sit back and snooze because they know what's about to happen. Now, the meat is how you organize your content to engage and make sense to your audience. So again, we can go back to the specific purpose. It's 7 things you need to know about storytelling, 7 things you need to know about, waterfowl. Could be a timeline. Any way to break up your presentation into chewable, tasty little bites. Again, it might already be inside of your specific purpose, the first draft of this. And the payoff has several roles. It's a clear conclusion. That's something a little more than, okay, I'm done. It lets you summarize and wrap up, connect back to your hook. And it's a call to action, because if you're, that's what we want, is the last step of ART, taking action. I'd like to focus on the hook with you today. What are some engaging tidbits, moments that we could use to open up your presentations, talks? Really this can be anything from a personal, conveying a little bit about why this subject matters to you. It could be a moment in your career but where you didn't know how you found yourself knee deep in a swamp staring down some creature. Yeah, take a minute and daydream into a compelling image, question, or maybe a favorite quote of yours. I opened up this presentation with a quote that I really thought was delicious and a little silly. Christy already sort of hooked me with yours earlier, Christy, with your like, oh, it's hot out in the summer and it feels terrible. And imagine a world where you don't have to mow your lawns and you can have a beautiful second front yard to look at. If HWA reaches the Adirondack Park, where my hemlocks are a foundational species, it may forever change this unique ecosystem. Yeah, that's a bold statement. When I teach winter sowing, native perennials, I like to start with the very first shrub I grew from seed. It took 2 years to germinate, and I had given up on it after the first year and used that pot for something else. Then it came back the following year, and now it's an 8-foot shrub. That's lovely. I wonder what moment you might drop in on that story. You could even start with giving up on this plant. That's sort of like a very tasty moment. It's like I'd had it up to here with this plant. I was going to get rid of it. But then insect populations are crashing. What can we do about it? Yes, it would be a negative hook, but it is a strong, compelling image. I wonder how you could tease this out with an even more specific word or picture. Like what does it mean that insect populations are crashing, especially if I'm just a little biased. Like when I lived in New York, the bugs I saw some ants, but I don't know what it means on a big scale. That's the challenge with this sort of data-rich presentation, is that sometimes it becomes generalist. It can feel generalist to an audience, especially, as a layperson audience. It can feel too big to comprehend. This quote, John Muir, every walk in nature, one receives far more than he seeks. Lovely. Oh, attacked by a goshawk on my first nature photography outing. Yes. Had I known more about the natural history of my subject, I would have been more prepared. That's a great segue. You're all catching on. A hook is a beautiful way to get a little giggle and chuckle and to get some eyes on you in a new way that invites warmth and invites audience attention, rather than just putting up an agenda slide and saying, here's what we're going to do. Here's the contract. Here we are. Neuroscience tells us this in many different studies. Audience need to receive information from a trusted source or it doesn't go anywhere. And decision-making happens in the emotional area of the brain. Engagement is an emotional connection or involvement. Connection, something that David O.T. says, is connection before content, empathy before evidence. There's a study by Amy Cuddy in her book Presence. I can put that in the chat. Presence by Amy Cuddy. And she notes that people judge you on 2 factors when they first meet you. Can I trust this person? And can I respect this person? She calls these factors warmth and competence. And these are the keys to exerting influence. Very interestingly, Cuddy says that for most people, especially in a professional context, they think that competence is the most important factor. But after all, you want to prove that you're smart and talented enough to handle your business. But actually, warmth or trustworthiness is the most important factor in how people evaluate you, because competence is only evaluated after trust is established. And I'm not going to talk about competence today because you're all very competent, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on warmth. How do you communicate warmth? Chime in the chat and let's think about a variety of settings. So that's not just, we talk about in Zoom. How do you communicate warmth over Zoom, teaching, papers, podcasts, videos? You mentioned some at the very top. I heard eye contact. Yep, there we go. Humor. We also discussed knowing names in the room. That's very warm. Personal stories, that's huge. Letting your humanity in the room and not being just a seemingly perfect robot. You're a human who's going to make mistakes and fumble and has a whole history. Sharing personal, we've all been there. Absolutely. Invite audience members to contribute from their experiences. Yeah. I actually attended a workshop this summer over Zoom in which we were all participants. It was on vulnerability, so this wasn't unprecedented, but we were all asked to begin to introduce ourselves by sharing a time during COVID that we had felt vulnerable. which was, as you can imagine, very rich territory. But I'd never experienced that before, where I was asked to be so vulnerable immediately, and it bonded us all quite quickly. Smile when speaking. Yes, it comes through in your voice. Yes. As a singer, I know it also helps you when you sing. Staying away from the cold scientific jargon. Yes. Jargon I am so curious about. I'm really interested in when we introduce new words into our audience's vocabulary and how you do that. How do you put the definition first and then the word? That's definitely something to play with. Okay, great. I'd love to do one more writing exercise. I'd love to hear just a few sentences about what drove you to this information that you are sharing or presenting. So why is this information so compelling that it needs to be shared? What did this information mean to you when you first learned it? Some of you have already touched on this. Your hooks definitely went into this a bit. And avoiding literally and like. So yes, take a minute now and think about what this information meant to you as an individual when you first learned it. Why is this compelling? Why is this urgent? Got a hook coming in from William. You don't know what you don't know. Yes. Alice, trees are our air and our lives. They carry our imaginary friends when we are small and our hopes for the future when we are grown. Oh, that was for me. I was your target audience there, Alice. I had lots of imaginary friends and trees. That really moved me. So many people go through their day without really seeing what's around them. I love to show people what they're missing. My absolute favorite is Touch Me Not seed pods. Oh, gosh. Yeah, I definitely want to know what that is. Yeah, that invitation to I love that invitation to what's something that I notice if I take an extra bit of time. It's kind of like being a part of a secret society almost, as if you take that extra bit and you look twice, you're going to see something unfold that maybe others don't. When we were asked to stay home early in the pandemic, I decided to explore early natural areas that I hadn't been to, found an expanded sense of home. Lush and as we're seeing, so many people are doing exactly the same thing right now. I hope for my nature photography students to be more mindful of the natural history of their subjects and the ecosystems. Yep. Well done. Already, just hearing from you about your personal connection to your work, hiked in back in the Smoky Mountains after seeing the devastation by HWA. I was so sad and sickened that I felt like I had to do something. I already feel closer to you all, you boxed on the screen, just by knowing why this work matters to you. Trying to get baby sea turtles back to their ocean journey. Oh boy. Here's what we're going to do to keep people from turning on lights or taking the babies back to their hotel rooms and found themselves with a $1,000 fine after the maid found them in the trash can. Oh God. A baby who was in this situation is making a great mascot at the nature center. Goodness gracious. All of these I not only feel these radiate warmth to me and passion. I don't know if anyone said that, but I think that was earlier. Passion about subject matter. That really comes through. And I can't teach you any structures that are going to talk to you about passion. That's just something that you have to be vulnerable and daring enough to bring. This last one is practice. This is largely about presentations for a moment. So not so much papers. So forgive this little dalliance if this is not your field, but presenting and talking and communicating in public is a skill, and it has to be practiced and practiced in the right way. So you're embedding the correct muscle memory. And you have to know how to best prepare yourself. You need to figure out how much time you need to prepare. That's not just in writing the presentation, but in practicing it. And how much time do you need to get ready right before you present? If you don't have time to prepare, maybe you write out a script. And if you do have time to prepare, you might even record yourself and jot down key points and find other ways to practice. I mean, I could spend a lot of time on this, but small groups, recording yourself, however you, there's lots of ways to do it. But this is a revelation, I think, if is that you have to practice presenting as well. You have to practice this part of the communication because it's so hard. Do any of you use slides or visuals with your presentations? No? Show of hands, kind of? Yes? Okay, so a little bit of slides. You shouldn't be reading off slides, generally speaking, because you are shaping what the audience takes in. There's too much text on your slides. Audience members are not going to be listening to you. They're going to be reading. Listeners can actually understand 100 to 25 to 150 words per minute, and readers can understand 250 to 300 words per minute. And if you're just reading what you wrote, no one's going to listen to you because they've already gone through it. Do any of you already have a rehearsal strategy? Any tips to share? You can unmute for this if you just want to shout it out. Just for singing. I got a nice warm-up. You know, I bet your singing warm-up would help with any public speaking type of engagement as well. I'll share some of mine, which including grounding my body and my breath. We talked a little bit about filler words, ums and you knows. In my experience, those filler words come from rushing internally. And so you really have to slow down and give yourself time to think and speak. Reciting it out loud, exactly. Making sure the words, you can wrap your mouth around the words. Slowing down generally helps. Again, listeners can only understand 125 to 150 words per minute. So there's time to slow down. Practice timing. Exactly. Exactly. Yes, Ken. Silence is okay. It actually gives your presentation and talk some breath, literally breath for integration. Cut the presentation down to yes. I'm a fan of brevity. Thank you very much. Tongue twisters also help. I love a tongue twister. That's part of my warm up. And well, speaking of timing, I'm going to jump. I was going to give you some quick little body language, but I'm going to skip to the Q&A, and if we have time, I can come back to some little body things. But generally speaking, we already discussed eye contact, how important that is. But body language, we want to be angled and open to our audience and relaxed and alert. One thing I think about a lot is opening up my back space and feeling like that my shoulders are wings and really speaking from my back. That's an imagination exercise that I really love. And it kind of just opens up the space around you and grounds you. Okay. So in summary, we've covered one, being audience centric. Yes. And Steve, yes, body language is so hard on Zoom. Oof. Still working on this, I think. In summary, be audience centric, not information centric, that's the ART of connection. 2, structure your story. We discussed the Sparkline, the explanation, the hook, meet, payoff. 3, we discussed connecting on an emotional level. That's warmth, that's humor, that's passion, imagination, personal anecdotes, and practice. You have to rehearse. Now, any questions, comments, concerns, revelations that came from that? I'd love to hear from you about challenges and success stories you've had on Zoom in particular. That's something that I'm still working on, and I find it very, very difficult.
I'm finding it difficult as well. I like to ask a lot of questions, and I leave myself time to get those answers, but it takes so much longer on Zoom. They're like, oh, do I want to chat? Or sometimes I just need nods of heads, and and it's hard to get that. And, you know, I can read people's faces and determine, am I going too fast? Should I slow down? Oh, I think I need to do this over again. I can't do any of that on Zoom. It's driving me crazy.
Yeah, when we're in person, we have spidey senses. You know, we can feel the temperature of the room. We can look around, do a quick scan for engagement and eye contact, and that's very much lacking. I liked what you said about shorter bursts as well. Just just kind of brevity and succinctness, and kind of, you do have to trust your instincts here. This is sort of where you can't, if I tell a joke and everyone's on mute, I have to hope that they're laughing, or I'm just going to hope that I'm making myself laugh at least.
So that's what I was just going to say, is because I do tell jokes, and I found it very unsettling that I couldn't get that feedback.
Silence. Yeah, it's chilling. Yeah. It's just silent.
I mean, that empowers you to continue forward. So it's really, really hard through Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Steve, I'm sorry, typing answers is really hard. It's hard. This is another tension I have, is when there's a lot of people, I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to volunteer their beautiful ideas. So that's good feedback. Maybe it should be smaller groups and we can just unmute and chat. Okay, from Lynn, it's become fairly common to begin with "so," as I just said, as a segue into topic. Is there a better way to change gears? In scripts that I write generally, or presentation scripts, I try to leave out the "so," or even, as we just said, leave just a kind of pause. We don't really need the "so." That is a really attractive filler word, though. It's a bit of a crutch, but not needed usually. I think if you wrote it down, you might just be able to strike the "so," and everyone would follow you with your pivot. Alice, we have to do virtual choir, and not hearing the other parts is so challenging. Oh gosh, Alice, I'm writing a musical and we just did a workshop on Zoom, and it's doing duets or any kind of thing like that was so hard. And so I can't imagine doing a choir. Sound alone. I saw a very silly meme that said Zoom is kind of like a seance. You're constantly asking, are you there? Can you hear us? Where it almost feels like that. Great. Any other questions? You're welcome to unmute and just shout it out as well. One of the best Zoom meetings, from Joy, 2 people took turns leading the presentation and engaged each other so warmly, and the questions and comments at the end were so insightful that I wanted to be more involved in the project. Oh, that's wonderful. It does help to have more than one panelist often. It's nice to just shift the speaker. It does feel like things are happening. I feel like on Zoom, you can't just stick with the same one format the whole time. Or, I mean, you can, I suppose, but the shift is helpful for energetics. Okay, any more questions? From Christy, speaking to a group where most people have their video off and you can be speaking to a bunch of squares. Yes, enormously difficult. Breakout sections that felt engaging. What's a good backdrop to have in a Zoom event? I have not been adventurous enough to dabble in this area, but I've seen lots of silly options. I'm afraid I'm not the expert on this. If anyone else has an answer for Selma, please chime in. I would say as neutral as possible, as non-distracting. But I mean, I've got this photo back here. I try to clean up my laundry and my dirty, my dirty clothes from behind me. I have found breakout sections engaging as well, Carolyn. I think smaller groups, I really enjoy that rather than just a passive lecture. So I hope this was a little more engaging than just me chatting at you for an hour. And agree with you, Christy, about not getting the feedback from the squares. From Steve, I teach an intensive birding by ear course, very interactive, lots of banter, trips to the blackboard, discussion. Have not figured out how I can do the same thing on Zoom without just turning it into a lecture. So it may be worth going online and finding some Zoom tutorials, because there are things like Zoom Blackboard. I think you can write on there, and more people can type and share their screen. There are capabilities to Zoom that you might find valuable and interesting. It might be worth having a quick YouTube around for tutorials. Because I know I'm not using Zoom to the fullest capabilities, but I've spoken to some educators who say there's dynamism here that you can really take advantage of. All right. Good night, Ken. We'll just wrap up then. Thank you for being here. You can always reach out to me with more questions, concerns, more. I offer lots of individual small groups, workshops in communication and storytelling. And here's my website. You were all really brilliant. I loved your chat comments. And again, I'm going to close with this quote, another one I love, which is, we tell stories to feel at home in the universe, and science does this too. I think more specifically, science can do this through story. And so you're all storytellers. Go tell the story. Thank you so much. There we go.